The morning sun felt heavy against my skin, but it couldn't touch the weight I carried inside. Today wasn't just another day. Today, everything could change or completely fall apart. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, gripping the edge of the sink like it could anchor me to reality. My wedding was in 2 days, but the storm waiting at the Metropolitan Club threatened to drown it before it even began. Brandon hadn't spoken much over breakfast. His eyes were dark with something I'd rarely seen: determination. Not the easy, charming kind, but a steady, unshakable resolve. When I finally caught his gaze, I realized he wasn't worried about me. He was worried about us. And that meant he wasn't going to let his family control this marriage the way they had always tried to. I could still hear my mother's words from yesterday, tripping with doubt. "Are you sure about this? They're not like us. They'll do anything." I ignored the tremor in my hands. I had my plan, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the Reynolds family or of anyone else. We met Harold at the club at 2:45 p.m., 15 minutes early to make sure we were the ones in control. The Metropolitan Club was imposing: dark wood panels, leather chairs that had held powerful men for generations, and oil paintings of dead industrialists glaring down from gilded frames. I had chosen it for one reason. Here, the Reynolds name meant nothing. Here, money didn't equal fear. Brandon arrived 5 minutes later looking transformed. The broken man I had seen at lunch had vanished. His charcoal suit was sharp, posture straight, jaw tight with purpose. He kissed my cheek softly and whispered, "Together," before taking his seat. We arranged ourselves like soldiers ready for battle. Harold to my right, Brandon to my left, our documents laid out like weapons. When the Reynolds arrived 15 minutes late, I barely looked up. They expected me to be nervous, checking my watch, trembling at their presence. Instead, they found us mid-discussion, calm, composed, unshakable. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "We don't have much time," he said, his tone sharp. "The rehearsal dinner is tomorrow, and this needs to be resolved." Rebecca's expression radiated disapproval. "I assume you've come to your senses. The wedding is tomorrow. Surely you don't want drama." I slid our counterproposal across the table. "There won't be any drama if we can reach a fair agreement," I said, my voice steady. Brandon's eyes locked on his parents. "You'll cancel the wedding? Go ahead, Mother. I'll personally call every guest tonight and explain why my parents tried to financially control my fiancé 2 days before our wedding." For the first time in decades, the Reynolds family was silent. Samuel's confidence faltered as he picked up the papers. Rebecca leaned in, trying to read over her shoulder, her composed face cracking under the pressure. I calmly laid out the numbers: 7 million in inherited wealth, 1.5 million in my tech company, and 800,000 in rental properties. Every cent documented, verified, and untouchable. Their carefully constructed ambush had crumbled before it even began. Rebecca's hands trembled as she clutched her pearls. "You could have told us," she whispered. "That's exactly why I didn't," I said. "I wanted to see who you really were. Now I know." Brandon reached for my hand under the table, warm, steady. His grip reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. Today wasn't just about standing up for myself, it was about standing together. The meeting ended, but the storm didn't. Rebecca's silence was louder than her words, and Samuel's stiff nod was the closest thing to surrender I had ever seen from him. Yet, I knew this wasn't over. People like them didn't back down. They simply looked for another opening. That night, the house felt colder. Brandon and I sat across from each other, untouched glasses of wine between us. The glow of the city lights flickered through the window, casting long shadows across the room. "Do you regret telling them?" Brandon asked finally, his voice low. I shook my head. No, I regret trusting them for even a second. At least now we both know where we stand. He leaned back, rubbing his temples. They'll try again. My mother, she doesn't lose gracefully. I gave a bitter smile. Then she hasn't met me properly yet. The next morning, as the rehearsal dinner preparations filled the air with chatter and phone calls, I found myself staring at my grandmother's locket. Inside was her picture, faded with age, but her eyes still held the same fire I remembered as a child. Grandma Rose had built her fortune with her bare hands, turning scraps of opportunity into something unshakable. She used to tell me, real power is quiet. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it waits, and when the time is right, it speaks once, and no one dares to argue. Her words became my armor. At the rehearsal dinner, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Guests filled the ballroom with laughter and chatter, oblivious to the war waging beneath the surface. Rebecca floated between tables in her emerald gown, her smile polite, but her eyes sharp, always scanning, always calculating. Samuel stood near the bar speaking with investors as if nothing in his world had shifted. When I entered with Brandon, whispers followed us. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were about. Somehow news of the prenup meeting had leaked. I could see it in the way old family friends looked at me, half curious, half judgmental. Rebecca coached me with a glass of champagne. "You look lovely," she said, her tone honeyed, but her grip on my arm just a bit too tight. "I hope there will be no unpleasant surprises tomorrow. After all, the wedding is about love, isn't it?" I met her gaze, unblinking. Yes, and love doesn't come with conditions. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning, brighter than ever. "We'll see, dear. We'll see." Later that night, Sarah pulled me aside. My sister had always been my anchor, the one person who saw through the masks. "You sure you can handle them?" she asked, searching my face. I laughed softly, though my chest was tight. "I've handled worse." Her eyes narrowed. "Maybe, but don't underestimate people who think they own the world. They play dirty." I squeezed her hand. "Then I'll just have to play smarter." When I finally returned home, Brandon was waiting. His tie loosened, his shoulders heavy with the weight of family loyalty and love for me. "I don't care about the money," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Not yours, not theirs. I just want to marry you." I smiled, though a part of me ached. "That's why we'll win, Brandon. Because for them, this is about control. For us, it's about love." He pulled me into his arms, and for a moment, the battle outside our walls didn't matter. But deep down, I knew Rebecca was already planning her next move. And this time, she wouldn't come with papers. She would come with something sharper. What Rebecca planned for the wedding day itself would make the prenup look like child's play. The morning of the wedding arrived, wrapped in a strange calm. Outside, the city buzzed like any other day. Horns, footsteps, laughter echoing through the streets. But inside my suite at the Drake Hotel, it felt like the eye of a storm. The dress hung near the window, ivory silk glowing in the early sunlight. Makeup artists fluttered around, stylists fussed with my hair, bridesmaids whispered in hushed tones. To anyone watching, it looked like a fairy tale. But beneath the surface, my mind was replaying every word from the past week, every warning, every threat. Rebecca hadn't spoken to me since the rehearsal dinner. that silence wasn't peace. It was strategy, and that worried me more than her sharpest words ever could. At 10 a.m., an envelope arrived. No sender's name, just slipped under my door. My heart sank as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper, the Reynolds family crest embossed at the top. If you proceed without signing, you proceed alone. No signature. No threats spelled out. Just a statement. A promise. I stared at it, my chest tightening. This wasn't just about a prenup anymore. This was about power. If I walked down that aisle without their terms, they were prepared to disown their son, sabotage the wedding, maybe even humiliate me publicly. For a moment, I closed my eyes and let the silence press in. Then I folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into my clutch. If they wanted a war, they would get one, but not on their terms, on mine. By noon, the ceremony space was a dream. White roses lined the aisle, chandeliers glittered overhead, a string quartet played softly. Guests arrived in waves, the hum of conversation filling the air with energy. Every smile, every glance felt like a judgment. Sarah slipped into the bridal room, her face flushed from the chaos outside. "You won't believe this," she whispered. "Rebecca has been talking to people, dropping hints that you refused a prenup. She's painting you as, a gold digger." I finished, my voice flat. Sarah's eyes softened. "Are you okay?" I met her gaze in the mirror. My reflection didn't look fragile. It looked sharp, focused. "I'm better than okay. Let her play her game. I've got one too." Minutes before the ceremony, Brandon came in through the side door. His suit was perfect, but his face betrayed sleepless nights. "They're cornering me," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Dad says this is my last chance to protect the family legacy. Mom says if I marry you without that signature, I'm done. No firm, no trust, no name." I stood, smoothing my dress. "And what do you say, Brandon?" He looked at me, torn between fear and love. "I say I don't care about any of it, but God, they make it sound like I'm betraying everything I've ever known." I touched his cheek gently. "Then maybe it's time to decide who you are without them." The doors opened. The music swelled. Gasps rose as I stepped into the room, every eye fixed on me. I held my head high, each step down the aisle deliberate, steady. Rebecca sat in the front row, her smile razor sharp. Samuel beside her like a stone statue. When I reached Brandon, he took my hand, but his grip trembled. I could feel the weight of the choice pressing on him as heavily as it pressed on me. The officiant began to speak, his words a blur. I wasn't listening. I was waiting for the moment Rebecca would strike, because I knew she wouldn't let the ceremony end without her final move. And sure enough, halfway through the vows, she stood. With a voice sweet enough to poison honey, Rebecca interrupted the wedding, and what she revealed in front of 200 guests threatened to shatter everything in a single breath. The night felt heavy before it even began. I walked into their grand dining room, its walls lined with portraits of ancestors who looked stern enough to pass judgment on anyone who dared to sit at their table. My fiancé's parents were already seated, looking every bit like the gatekeepers of some exclusive world I had been allowed to peek into but not fully join. Dinner started off politely enough. Questions about my work, my childhood, and where my parents were from. But under every question, there was a sharpness, a hidden test, as if they were less interested in knowing me and more focused on finding a reason why I wasn't good enough. My fiancé tried to smooth things over, but the tension was unmistakable. And then it happened. His father, with the calm precision of someone who had rehearsed this moment, slid a folder across the table toward me. "We think it's best if you look this over before the wedding," he said, his tone firm but almost too controlled. The folder looked innocent enough, just paper, just ink, but when I opened it, my stomach tightened. It was a prenup, a contract, a wall disguised as legal protection. The message was clear. They didn't trust me. My fiancé looked embarrassed, his fork hovering uselessly over his plate. His mother's eyes were on me, sharp and expectant, as though waiting for me to flinch or crumble. But I didn't. Instead, I took a slow breath, smiled faintly, and closed the folder without saying a word. Inside, though, a storm was brewing. I could feel anger pressing against my ribs, but more than that, I felt something else. Resolve. They thought they had cornered me. They thought I was the outsider desperate to cling to their wealth. They had no idea. That night, I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I let them believe they had the upper hand, because deep down, I knew something they didn't. Something that would change everything. And as I went home with my fiancé, the folder still heavy in my bag, I couldn't help but wonder, how long would it take before they realized they had underestimated me in the worst possible way? That night, when I got back home, the folder sat on my coffee table like an uninvited guest. I poured myself a glass of water, sat down, and just stared at it. A simple stack of papers, yet it carried the power to shatter the love story I thought I was building. My chest felt tight, not just from what had happened at dinner, but from the silence I had chosen to keep. I replayed the entire evening in my mind, his father's cold delivery, his mother's watchful eyes, my fiancé's uncomfortable silence. Not once did he stand up for me. Not once did he say, "She doesn't need this." And maybe that hurt the most, because love, to me, wasn't about contracts and clauses. It was about trust. But here I was, staring at legal terms that seemed to scream one thing: they don't trust you. I opened the folder, my hands trembling only slightly. Line after line, it outlined what I wouldn't be entitled to: property, inheritance, businesses, assets, all neatly locked away. It wasn't just about protecting wealth. It was about locking me out of their world, a world they never wanted me to have a real claim to. And yet, I didn't tear it up. I didn't throw it across the room. Instead, I smiled to myself. If only they knew the truth. If only they knew that I wasn't after their money, because I already had more than enough of my own. $7 million. That was my reality. Money I had worked for, invested wisely, and protected fiercely. It wasn't just an account balance. It was freedom. Freedom they couldn't take from me, no matter how many contracts they slid across the dining table. Still, I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest. This wasn't about the money. This was about love, and whether my fiancé had the courage to fight for me when it mattered. He hadn't, and that silence echoed louder than anything his parents had said. I placed the papers back in the folder, closed it, and whispered to myself, they think they hold the power, but the truth, they're the ones standing in the dark. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I realized something else. The real test hadn't been for me. It had been for him. And with the wedding just 2 days away, I couldn't shake the question that now haunted me. If he couldn't defend me now, how would he ever protect us in the life we were supposed to build together? The next morning, sunlight poured through my curtains, but it brought no warmth. I woke up with a weight in my chest, the prenup folder still on my coffee table, like a shadow I couldn't escape. My phone buzzed, messages from friends asking about wedding details, little countdowns to the big day. But how could I celebrate when everything inside me felt uncertain? I glanced at my fiancé's name on my phone screen. We hadn't spoken since the dinner. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't even tried to explain. That silence said more than words ever could. By noon, he finally showed up at my door. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his eyes searching mine for forgiveness before he even said a word. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice low. "I didn't know my parents were going to bring that up like that." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think he was caught off guard, that he was stuck between loyalty to me and fear of disappointing them. But part of me knew better. He knew this was coming. Maybe not the timing, but the intention. His parents had likely been planning this all along. "I'm not marrying your parents," I said quietly. "I'm marrying you. And if you can't stand by me when they treat me like that, then what are we even doing?" He looked away, guilt flittering across his face. "They just want to protect the family assets," he said, almost defensively. "It's not personal." But how could it not be personal? They were telling me, with signatures and fine print, that I wasn't to be trusted, that I was disposable, that I was a guest in a world I could never truly belong to. I wanted to scream at him to demand he choose me over them, but instead I stayed calm because I knew something he didn't, something that made their prenup not just insulting, but laughable. I thought back to the years I had spent building my own career, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the risks that had paid off. My investments had grown into something solid, something real, $7 million in assets. And unlike his family's wealth, mine was entirely my own. I looked him in the eye. "Do you really think I need their money?" I asked, softly. He frowned, confused, clearly not understanding the full weight of my words. The silence stretched between us like a canyon. In that moment, I realized the real issue wasn't the prenup. It wasn't even his parents. It was him. Did he see me as his equal, or would I always be someone he needed to defend rather than stand beside? When he left that afternoon, I sat alone with my thoughts, the clock ticking louder with every passing minute. 2 days until the wedding. 2 days until I had to decide whether I was walking into a marriage built on love or one already cracked by doubt. And as I stared at the prenup once more, I felt the fire inside me harden into something sharper. They thought they had tested me, but the truth was, the test wasn't mine. It was theirs. By late afternoon, I had gathered every document I could possibly need. Contracts, financial statements, investment summaries, everything laid out neatly in my briefcase. The plan was simple, yet daring. Present the counteroffer, reveal my financial position, and establish clear boundaries with his family before they could pull any more strings. Brandon arrived at my apartment at 5:30, looking tense but determined. His suit was tailored perfectly, his hair neatly combed, but there was a difference in his expression I hadn't seen before, a seriousness, a resolve that made my chest tighten. He didn't speak much on the drive to the Metropolitan Club, only squeezing my hand once in silent reassurance. The club's doors opened to a world of old money and old power. Dark wood panels, leather chairs, oil paintings of men whose names I didn't know, but whose presence screamed authority. Here the Reynolds name was only one among many. It was perfect. Harold, my lawyer, was already waiting. "Ready for battle?" he asked, quietly, adjusting his wider-rimmed glasses. I nodded, gripping my briefcase tightly. The word battle echoed in my mind. This wasn't about a wedding. This was about respect, equality, and reclaiming the power they thought they still held over me. At exactly 3:15, Samuel and Rebecca Reynolds arrived. 15 minutes late, of course, their standard power play. I looked at them as they entered, expecting dominance, expecting fear. What they found instead was calm composure, my focus locked on the documents before me, Harold reviewing each clause, Brandon at my side. Samuel spoke first in that practiced, commanding voice. "We don't have much time. The rehearsal dinner is tomorrow. This needs to be resolved now." Rebecca's gaze fell on me, her expression radiating disapproval. "I assume you've come to your senses. The wedding is tomorrow. Surely you don't want to create unnecessary drama." I met her gaze steadily, my voice firm. "There won't be any drama if we can reach a reasonable agreement." Samuel waved dismissively, reaching for the papers he had drafted. "The agreement has been presented. You simply need to sign it." I slid out counter-proposal across the table. "Actually, we're here to discuss terms. Your document was unacceptable. This is our alternative." Brandon's voice cut through the room like steel. "You'll cancel the wedding? Go ahead, Mother. I'll personally call every guest tonight and explain exactly why my parents tried to financially control my fiancé 2 days before our wedding." Shock rippled across the table. Rebecca's perfectly composed face faltered. Samuel's confidence wavered. For the first time in decades, their sons were speaking as equals, not children to be controlled. Harold's calm voice broke the silence. "Before you dismiss our counter-proposal, there's something you should know about who you've been trying to intimidate." I reached into my briefcase and placed the financial statements on the table with deliberate precision. The soft thud echoed in the room like a drumbeat of truth. Samuel reached for them, confidence fading page by page. Rebecca leaned over, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "This can't be accurate," Samuel stammered. "Every cent documented and verified," Harold confirmed. "Miss Vance's net worth is approximately $10 million before she ever met your son." The room fell silent. I spoke calmly. $7 million inherited, another $1.5 million in my technology company, $800,000 in rental properties, all mine before Brandon. And yet you treated me like I needed your approval to live or marry. That stops today." Rebecca's hands went to her throat, clutching her pearls. Samuel's face went from red to pale. The arrogance drained from his posture. For the first time, the Reynolds superiority complex was exposed, completely undone. Brandon's hand found mine under the table, steady and warm. I looked at him, and in that moment, I knew. We were no longer the ones under their control. We were the ones holding the power. The tension in the room was palpable. Samuel sat frozen, the papers in front of him a mirror of everything he had underestimated. Rebecca, normally composed and imperious, seemed fragile, her eyes darting between the documents, me, and Brandon. For the first time, I saw doubt, and it was intoxicating. "You've had $10 million," Rebecca finally whispered, almost to herself. Her voice trembled as if admitting a truth she had long denied. "All this time, while we treated you like a gold digger?" "Yes," I interrupted calmly, finishing her sentence. "While you questioned my apartment, my car, my parents' jobs, while you assumed I couldn't afford a proper wedding dress, I had $10 million through it all." Samuel's jaw tightened. He picked up the papers again, scanning each page as if seeing numbers could somehow reverse reality. His authoritative composure, honed over decades, had cracked. Harold leaned back in his chair, the smallest smirk betraying his satisfaction. "You should be relieved," he added. "She has significant assets of her own to protect." Brandon's eyes blazed with a mixture of pride and fury. "They tried to ambush you in your own home, to control our marriage before it even began. That stops today." Samuel's lips moved, but no words came. He had never encountered resistance like this. Brandon's voice, firm and unwavering, had sliced through decades of entitlement. Rebecca's hands fidgeted with her pearls, the armor of designer clothing failing to shield her now. "But we were trying to protect you," she said, her voice cracking. "From what?" Brandon asked sharply. "From marrying someone who loves me, who is strong, capable, and independent?" I watched them, seeing years of control dissolve in real time. The prenuptial agreement, the very weapon they had planned to wield over me, was now their undoing. It reflected truth, my truth, and forced them to confront it. "Perhaps we should focus on the matter at hand," Harold said, regaining the room's attention. "The counter-proposal we've prepared is fair. It protects both parties equally, sets clear boundaries, and ensures mutual respect." Samuel picked up the document, mechanically reading through it. Rebecca remained frozen, the realization of defeat evident in every gesture. Their power play had backfired spectacularly. The carefully constructed facade of control had shattered. Brandon reached for my hand under the table, squeezing it reassuringly. I mirrored his grip, silently acknowledging the unspoken truth. We were united, and nothing they could do would change that. After a tense silence, Samuel finally spoke. "My legal team wants modifications." "No modifications. The agreement stands as written. Sign it, or we walk away." Brandon leaned closer, whispering under his breath, "The same ultimatum you gave us. Now it's theirs to accept." Rebecca's voice was soft when she finally spoke, almost vulnerable. Why, why did you hide this from us?" I met her gaze steadily. "Because I wanted to see the real you, and now I have. Money doesn't change character, it reveals it." The room was quiet, except for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock. For the first time in my life, I felt unshakable. The Reynolds had been forced to see me, not as the woman they assumed, but the woman I truly was. The envelope felt heavier than it should have when the courier handed it to me the next morning. The Reynolds family crest gleamed on the front, an emblem of the battle we had fought and won. My hands trembled slightly as I signed for it, heart racing with anticipation and relief. Inside was the prenuptial agreement, signed by both Samuel and Rebecca Reynolds, notarized and proper. A handwritten note from Samuel read, "Ms. Vance, or should I say soon-to-be Mrs. Reynolds, you have proven yourself more formidable than we anticipated. Perhaps that is exactly what Brandon needs and what this family needs. We look forward to welcoming you properly. Samuel Reynolds." There was no note from Rebecca. Her signature alone was the acknowledgement of defeat, but it was enough. It symbolized recognition. She had seen me for the first time, not as someone beneath her, but as an equal. When Brandon called at midnight, I could hear the chaos unfolding in his childhood home. His parents were fighting, not over me, but over their own misjudgments. He laughed softly, a mix of relief and disbelief in his voice. For the first time, their anger isn't my problem. It's liberating. The wedding day arrived. As I stood in my dress, Sarah adjusting my veil and my mother beside me, there was a knock at the door. Rebecca stepped in, carrying a small velvet box. Inside were antique sapphire earrings, treasures of Margaret Reynolds, the grandmother who had saved the family legacy with nothing but resilience and determination. "These belong to Samuel's grandmother," Rebecca said softly. "She would have appreciated you, someone who understands that true worth isn't always visible on the surface." I replaced my pearls with the sapphire earrings, a symbolic passing of strength. I said, "Thank you," simply. The ceremony was beautiful, but the real transformation was in the air around us. The guests watched not just the bride and groom, but the united force we had become. Samuel nodded at me with genuine respect. Rebecca smiled softly, and Brandon's eyes shone with love and freedom. At the reception, the Reynolds family dynamic had completely shifted. Samuel discussed investments with me as an equal. Rebecca introduced me proudly to guests, acknowledging my accomplishments. Even Brandon's siblings treated me with respect rather than suspicion. 6 months later, the balance had held firm. Sunday dinners with the Reynolds were now monthly, boundaries respected, and genuine collegiality had replaced condescension. Our home, a Lincoln Park townhouse, stood as a symbol of equality and partnership. I often stand in my office, gazing at the photo of Grandma Rose on my shelf. She taught me that true wealth isn't just money, it's strength, strategy, and patience. The Reynolds learned that lesson too, the hard way. They had tried to ambush a powerless girl, only to discover she had never been powerless at all. Our revenge wasn't about destruction, it was about recognition. The prenuptial agreement became the mirror reflecting their assumptions back at them. Their contempt met with equal force, and for the first time, they saw me clearly. Brandon held me close as we danced, whispering, "You didn't just beat them, you freed me too." And in that moment, I realized the truth. The treasures hidden in plain sight, wisdom, courage, and integrity, are the most powerful of all. The opponents you never saw coming are often the ones who teach you your greatest lessons. We had won not just the battle over wealth or control, but the freedom to stand as equals, partners, and a team.